All right, this is part 4 of, I think I called it Pinheads and Patriots, part 4. So we're talking about the American Revolution and why it started, all the reasons that were stirring up. We had preachers saying this is a godly thing because of the Great Awakening. So many people had gotten saved. We had Thomas Paine writing Common Sense. Why is a little tiny island ruling a whole continent? Okay, and we had Samuel Adams kind of with his whisper campaign. We had the Boston Massacre. Well, right after that, I can't believe I don't have a picture of him, but I don't. I'm sure it's in one of these books that I have all around, but we have Patrick Henry, and I want you guys to know him, and he's one of the names that I told you guys to put a little flat, okay? And under Patrick Henry, I want his picture. He is best known for saying, "Give me liberty or give me death." Patrick Henry was a very courageous man. He knew by saying this at the Continental Congress, he could get beheaded and killed right on the spot. Remember what courage is. Doing what is right, even if it is dangerous, and even if I am afraid. And it's really interesting when he was saying what he needed to say and the reaction of the people. So he's talking, and he's kind of standing outside, like on the balcony, and he's talking about liberty. And he says, Caesar has his Brutus, and that means Caesar insisted on his way and was stabbed. Charles I had his Cromwell, King of England, cut off his head. And George III, which is the current king, would profit by this, meaning this is going to happen to you. So Caesar has his Brutus, Charles I had his Cromwell, and George III would profit by this. What is he saying? Death to the king. Oh my gosh. So the people yelled, treason, treason. First of all, they're party to it if they're listening to it. And he said, if this be treason, then make the most of it. He did not care. He had it. They passed, and so they were passing a resolution against the Stamp Act, and it passed. And he joined the Committee of Correspondence just like Samuel Adams did. So Patrick Henry, probably one of the most well-known for speaking out right before the war. Patrick Henry, give me liberty or give me death, and if this be treason, then make the most of it. And I made my kids memorize a portion of his speech when they were younger, because it really is pretty awesome what he had to say. And he was declaring that we need to be liberated, which basically was treason against the government, and they could have come down at any time and gotten his head. So it's pretty awesome what he said. All right, so all that happens. We have Patrick Henry, we have Thomas Paine in Common Sense, why is a little tiny island ruling a continent, and kings want absolute rule. We have the Great Awakening. We have preachers saying we have to fight this. This is our Christian duty is to fight against tyranny, so people can come to the colonies then that were the colonies. We have all that. We have Samuel Adams going around. We have the Boston Massacre. All these things led up to, first, the shot heard around the world, which is the Battle of Lexington Green, which I talked about in class already one time. Lexington Green and Concord, and how Paul Revere rode to Lexington. He didn't make it all the way to Concord, but he did ride to Lexington before they grabbed his horse and made him walk back. They didn't grab him, but they grabbed his horse, made him walk back, and he did warn John Hancock and Samuel Adams, look, they want your head. Samuel Adams and John Hancock wouldn't hide. They were like, no, but people are like, please, for your own sake, this is just foolish to just present yourselves. So they wouldn't leave, but they did kind of hide so that they wouldn't be hunted down. But he warned them, but then they took his horse, so he couldn't go on to Concord. William Dawes went on to Concord, gave the people warning enough so they hid all the ammunition in Concord. They couldn't find the ammunition. And then we had a little skirmish in Concord, which was also an accident. Someone accidentally set fire to someone's house, but it really was an accident. And so we thought they did it on purpose, and we had a skirmish on the bridge in Concord, and a lot of our men died. So our men died in Lexington. We're going to go over this in class, because the only way I know how to teach you this, even though we've already taught it one time, is to draw it on the board and go over it, because it's too hard to just teach with words. They had a skirmish at Lexington, shot heard around the world. Then they went to Concord, had a skirmish on the bridge. But then the soldiers did something that English soldiers do, is they got in straight lines with their pretty red coats. That's why we called them lobster backs, and their brass buttons, and they marched back to Boston. Well, when they marched back to Boston, every teenager, kid, old man, old lady came out with their shotguns, and we like picked them off as they were walking back. And they didn't even stop and like go hide behind trees and do things like we did, because George Washington had learned that from the French and Indian War. They just kept marching. So people are falling down all around them. And by the time, even though they technically won those battles, by the time they got back to Boston, they were very much shaken. They were telling Gage, and they were telling the generals there, this is not going to be pretty. So here they look, their soldiers, they won these 2 battles, but their soldiers are wounded. Their soldiers are, a large portion of them are dead. And I think then Britain, who was the controlling army by far of any army in the world, they had never really lost. They were the dominant army. It would be like little Kazakhstan or something like that going up against the United States and winning. It was that like, no, we're just going to crush them like a bug, And they couldn't believe it, but we had everything on the line. We had nothing to lose. We were scrappy. We had every single thing on the line. We had, we had to win. There was no other choice but to win. And we just wanted to get them out. So, and as we study a lot of our generals, you'll see our generals weren't interested in killing them. They were interested in beating them, defeating them mentally, and getting them out. So we weren't just in it. Like, they had some brutal, brutal men in the English military that really just wanted to dishearten, destroy, hang kids, all that kind of stuff. Then you also had Gentleman Johnny and people serving with the English that weren't that way. But we just and they hired Hessians, these huge German men that would carry 100-pound backpacks and would just annihilate. I mean, they're just huge men to come and fight. So they had hired a lot of people to help them fight too that didn't have skin in the game. They were just hired to fight. And so we had everything to lose. And so we weren't going to give up. Okay? So then the revolution starts with Lexington and Concord. We're going to go over that in class this week as soon as it starts. Lexington and Concord. We may even go outside and kind of act it out. I like to do that. I'm sorry. But then you remember it. So if we do that, I want you guys to be prepared. Have shorts on or whatever's appropriate for running outside. So we will go outside at some point today, and I'll have an extra special treat to do that, okay? Because you know me and my treats. I like to give treats. All right, so anyway, so the war starts. Of course, they picked General Washington, or George Washington, to be their leader. He was just known as a man of character. Also, I said something about democracy yesterday that I want to make sure I clarify. Democracy, and you guys can always put extra things in your lap book. If I don't specifically tell you to put this in your lap book, I would love to see extra things in your lap book, and I'm sure I'd probably give you extra points if I saw extra things in there. Democracy versus a republic. We have a representative republic. So we, like 100 people, let's say, it's more than that, but let's say I have 100 people. For every 100 people, I have a representative. In our case, we just, we group however many people in each state gets one representative, okay? So, it's the same. So in Massachusetts, for every certain amount of population, they get one representative. In Texas, we get one representative. So we have more representatives in Texas than they have in Massachusetts. But then in the Senate, of course, they have two, we have two. That was the compromise. All right, so democracy is ruled by majority. Mob rule, whatever the majority wants, whatever is best. A republic is a representative government, and we're ruled by law, which is the Constitution. And the Constitution, we already talked about, based on the Bible. Remember I talked about Charles Finney's got saved. It was an atheist by reading law books. Our law is based on the Bible. And our republic is based on law, which is the Constitution. Okay? People elect representatives to make laws, and the minorities are protected. So we have a great thing. All right, this is George Washington. Let me see if this is, this is the one with, where we talked about the double spy is in this one. And James Armistead. You can clearly look that he's not a slave. Look at that hat. And people say, this is George Washington, a slave, holding his horse. No, it wasn't. James Armistead, double spy. We talked about that last week. This is George Washington. This is the man that lately I've been hearing little things about how he didn't have good character, which is amazing. They've seen diaries. Just everything that was written about George Washington he was a man of character. And remember, we already talked about in part 3, I think it was, about how they told him he could be king. They offered him all this stuff. They wanted him to keep ruling and be king. And he said, no, time to step down. So he really, when things are being offered to you like that, he really had to have character and be a godly man. Well, everything written about him until the last few years is how he's such a godly man. Here's another picture of him. All right. He fought in the French and Indian War before he fought in the American Revolution. Well, there was an Indian chief. I hope I haven't already told you guys the story, but I'm telling it again. There was an Indian chief who told his braves that he was fighting with the French against the English. He told his braves to shoot George Washington. He was clearly the leader in this battle, so he said, I want you to shoot him. So they had arrows, but they also had guns. They were shooting at him, and he couldn't be killed. He had 2 horses shot out from under him. Let's see where I've got my sheet on that. He had 2 horses shot from under him, and he had 4 bullet holes in his hat, and he did not die. So after a while, it became apparent to the Indian chief, this man is not going down, he's not going to die, and he's protected. Then they said the Great Spirit. He's protected by the Great Spirit. So they quit shooting at him. They said that we're not going to be able to kill him. He clearly is protected by someone other than himself. So here it is. He had 2 horses shot out from under him, 4 bullet holes in his coat, but he also had bullet holes in his hat. Indian chief fired at him personally 17 times. After the French and Indian War, the Indian chief wanted to meet him. So he traveled to go meet him, and he said, I personally shot at you 17 times. We saw the bullets go at you, and they just wouldn't affect you, and we knew you were protected. And I always said, I want to meet you. So that Indian chief was just like, you couldn't be shot. He was the man that God had at the time. So George Washington led the troops. He was known for many great things. He was known to be very wise. He was a man of faith and courage. He always kept his enemy guessing. He didn't do things the way everybody did them. He just always kept him guessing. He was always kind of positioned for attack. One time he was in New York, and they were cornered, and there was nothing else to be done, and he moved out his troops in the middle of the night, and I don't know how the British didn't hear him, because they were kind of had him cornered, and anyway, and a great fog came over the area where they were, and they moved all their troops out, and they don't know how they did it, and he had one guy making all this noise and hitting things, so they were trying to make it sound like, because at night they would suspend their fighting until the morning, and they were trying to make it sound like a lot of people were in camp, and then that guy left too, and in the morning when the fog lifted, they were gone. So they really count that there was a lot of miracles really that God performed, and they didn't have one loss of man, and they were literally cornered. He said multiple times, one of his quotes is, I do not think myself equal to the command I am honored with. He said, there's no amount of inducements, no amount of money, no amount of pay that could ever make me do this if I didn't think it was a just cause, if I wasn't fighting for just reasons. And he said, I don't want to profit from it in any way. So he kept a list of expenses. That's all he wanted. I think I already went over that most of the troops didn't even get paid most of the time. They didn't have shoes. Listen, when they were in Valley Forge, when the troops were in Valley Forge, which you hear about, a third of the men died of hunger and a third of the men starved to death. It was horrific. General von Steuben tried to whip him in shape, came over, helped. That's when we got some help from Lafayette, the French, and they would look over at like their houses. They could look over and see the English occupying their houses, either with the people that were on their side, the loyalists, and they could see people like the lights as they were starving, as they didn't have food, if they didn't have supplies, and they would look over and see people dancing and making merry. The other houses, if you were fighting in the war, they would burn your house. So they would see people dancing and making merry and being warm and having food just across the way. It was very clear at night. They were starving, they were freezing, they were eating mud cakes because that's all there was to eat. And that leads me into General or Nathaniel Greene. Oh, I love him. I feel like we'd be besties too if he was here. But anyway, George Washington was just a great man of faith, and amidst all these trials, he kept his faith. He knew this was the right thing to do. What the men sacrificed for our freedoms, you guys, and women like Molly Pitcher, what people sacrifice for us to then not even vote and not care about that. Of course, I don't want you to vote if you don't know how to vote, because I don't want liberals swaying you. But for us to not even take that seriously, to us to not willing to stand out in the rain to vote,